Education is important. In the future it will be even more important. When we look currently in many other parts of the world, we see that there is a huge inequalities. If we don't educate our children to understand the implications, we need to build much more sustainable futures for us. Hi, here is Markku, Wilenius, your traveling futurist. Today I'm going to talk about the topic which is very close and dear to me, which is learning, education, and all that contains the idea that how do we develop as human beings and as societies. Now, I have done most of my work in the academic world. And academic world is all about educating, it's all about researching, and then some of it is also about how to bring that knowledge into organizations, businesses, and so on. And my own topic has been the future studies. So I'm a professor of future studies, but I also work with UNESCO. UNESCO is the United Nations organization that supports education, learning, science and cultures all around the world, but particularly in the global south. And when we look at the role of education and learning, I first have to start something very personal that is related to my home country, Finland, because Finland is a country that you find on the top of many of those type of the global indexes that talks and measures the level of equality, the level of the happiness, the level of the quality of the social systems, the level of the quality of the political systems, the level of the quality of our economies as well. And why is it that Finland is able to perform so strikingly well? One of the key determinants, if not the most important, has been the equality in its education system. That was built very long time ago. Actually, it started to be built before we got our independence. So it's been a kind of a part of our culture, but it's been a very important asset for us how to bring the type of the society into the world which enables each of its citizens, regardless where they come from, who their parents are, to tap into the education system and get from that education system the stuff that helps and enables to be a part of the society and contribute to that. And when we look currently in many other parts of the world, we see that there is a huge inequalities. There are lots of countries where a lot of education has been privatized, which means that you need money, sometimes a lot of money, to get a proper education for your children. And of course, this is not how it should be. I'm not talking about the emerging economies here. I'm talking about so-called developed nations such as UK or even USA. Many countries in whatever part of the world that have chosen to build the type of the education system which is built on this idea that the level of the education is determined by how much money you and your parents have in their pockets. And that's not, of course, the right way to build up equal opportunities for people in any country. Now, when we look at the role of learning education, and I would say science too, it is very important to understand that the role of that sector is really to bring the type of the people into the society that are creative, that can make difference, that can create something for the society that contributes to the overall system. And by doing that, they will also get something for themselves. At least they will get food, they will get the roof and so forth to match with a basic need. But moreover, since this is not enough anymore in this world just to be able to cater for the basic needs, what we now need in the world and in our societies more and more is that we create opportunities for all people to contribute in their own individual way to the society. And it doesn't have to be anything large or significant, but it has to be something that the people feel that they are using their potential. Because if they don't have those chances, people get frustrated. And this is where we have a lot of problems in many countries, particularly those type of the countries, that because of the wars of conflict or inbuilt inequalities in the country, that there are large masses of people that are deprived of these opportunities to learn and educate themselves. And unlike in the past, today, the most of the professions that is created, whether in the industry, whether in the services or somewhere else, they actually require for you to have a prior skills and know-how, to the extent that it's very hard to learn them just by yourself. So you need to be a part of the learning system to be able to kind of be competent on those markets. Now, that means that as we move into the future, this type of the more knowledge-based economies and societies are bound to take the further steps so that the learning becomes even more important in the future for these economies, the learning and equal opportunities for education. And that's why we need to be looking at whatever happens in our societies and whatever disruptions there are, we should actually look that our education systems are adequate and they cater for the needs not only for some parts of the population but for the whole population. And today, when we look at the world and what has happened in the last 30, 40 years, we can see that there are some significant differences when it comes to the educational system. Well, let's look at, for instance, the difference between the China and India. When it comes to the China, everything changed after Mao. And from the 1980s on, they started to build a very different kind of education system too. And this education system was the one that caters for the needs of the primary and secondary education. Everything that happens before you might enter into university. And that system is actually even much more important than the university system, because that builds the real basis. And in China, that built pretty well, I must say. And when we look today about the performance of the China when it comes to its economy, wealth creation, but also its kind of a social cohesion, education has been a very significant part of creating what China is today in positive sense. And that was because the education was spread really to the large masses of the people, reaching in principle everybody that is in a need of those type of the services. And we all are in need at certain time and certain age for those type of the services, that's one for sure. Now, India, on the other hand, also has created an education system, which is to some extent quite similar to the China. But India, from its cultural heritage, is a bit different kind of a society. For a long period of time, it had this kind of a caste system, and if you were on the bottom of this caste system, it actually means that you were excluded into much of the society, including the education. So you didn't have an access. And still today, there is a large amount of people, there is an estimate somewhere between 15 and 20%, that actually do not have still any real access to education, even to learn the alphabets. So which means that a lot of people are left out in this system. Now I'm also saying that India has become much better in that. But if you compare China and India, you can of course see that China has actually moved much more faster in its development than India. And part of the reason I claim for that is because China has been much more inclusive in terms of its education system, and thereby much more efficient how it's built this education for all. So education system is hugely important, and as I said, it's even more important to the future. But then I want to talk about something that I have been personally working with in my role as a university professor, but also as a chair of UNESCO. So I'm also kind of a professor in the UNESCO, and my whole title here is UNESCO Chair of Learning for Transformation and Planetary Futures. Learning for transformation meaning the type of the learning that enable us to be a change makers in the society. And planetary futures obviously refers to the fact that we need to be more and more thinking about how do we build a type of a society that is really sustainable and that deliver the type of the impact that is positive for the future and is positive for the future of the generations that are to come. And from that perspective, we need to inject a lot of more futures thinking into our education and learning systems. We need to make people much more aware about the implication of lots of these kind of a standard ways of looking at the world and develop it. We need to kind of inject the idea that we need to alternate our development, we need to make a difference, and we need to build much more sustainable futures for us. Which means that it takes a lot of courage from people, even today, to work on these goals, because there are lots of vested interest and the people that see that if you start to talk about the sustainability, that means that you are kind of threatening their business. And of course, we need to say clearly that this is not the way that we are gonna create anything sustainable, anything good for the next generation. So instead we need to create and help to create this type of awareness through our education system, through our learning systems that enable us to make the difference and start to act differently and to make the change. And our education system is where we need to start this work. If we are not doing that on the very early age, if we don't educate our children to understand the implications of our own action, and thereby kind of introducing what this kind of a idea about thinking future really is about, then we are not getting very far in our education system. So we need to bring into our education system the idea that all actions have consequences, and we need to think about those consequences as much as we're thinking about those actions themselves. And only these two things sort of combined make it possible for us to find the right ways to run and operate our earthly things here. Now, so my point is this: education is important. In the future it will be even more important, and education is the kind of a plateau, it's a kind of a platform that brings all the people together. And particularly today, when we think about how globalized we have become, the education system also should comprise the idea of the global reach and helping people to understand more the other cultures, the other point of view, and sort of assimilate those different views into our own, and see the benefit of that type of the diversity and richness. I'm UNESCO Chair of Learning for Transformation and Planetary Futures, so I'm really much into this topic of education.